So next up is trauma triggers. So if you have had any sort of trauma in your life, you know what that is. But genuinely, when you encounter a trigger after trauma, a strong emotional and behavioral reaction comes over you. It's as if you are reliving that trauma all over again. The word triggered has become a popular term to describe anything that causes, excuse me, emotional discomfort. But for people who have experienced trauma, triggers can be terrifying, all-consuming, and can seemingly come out of nowhere. Triggers can be anything that reminds you of past trauma, which might include certain smell, particular song or sound, or a piece of clothing. Triggers are unique to the individual. Trauma is known to have a long-lasting and repetitive effect on our minds. However, there is hope for those who experience after effects. Trauma-informed care and other treatments can help you live a happy and fulfilling life. So a trigger can be anything that sparks a memory of a trauma or a part of a trauma. So that's basically for those who have been in very dysfunctional relationships, abusive relationships, whether that could be anything from work to friendships to family to partnerships to pretty much anything that could have happened in life. For women, it's even more diverse, basically, than for men, because like some traumas can be, you know, emotional. Some others could be like, I mean, they're all emotional, but in general, that could be more of like, you know, sexually tainted, unfortunately, or neglect, or, you know, if you have encountered your fair share of narcissistic abuse or neglect, like it kind of shows, and that's also like one of the things that I wouldn't say necessarily mess with your perception of reality, but kind of show you how your perception of reality is a little bit different, and some things can make you relive those horrifying moments just because of some events. Like in my case, it would be genuinely a tone of voice, a tone of speech. So in my young years of life, there was a certain tone of speech which followed a certain pattern, and if I hear any of it, even if it's not directed at me, it still makes me literally fall into this freeze and flee response. So it's like it doesn't matter if it's towards anybody else, but like it's like triggering for me. And I recently had a kind of like a situation where I went to see a friend of mine, and their family is pretty big. There's a lot of kids, and the way mother spoke to the kids in this kind of like dictatorship tone, with a hint of like anger, and there was this kind of like an undertone of like, you're not good enough, like what do you think of yourself, within how she spoke. And that made me kind of like, in a sense, relive my part of my childhood. And I was like, okay, so I have to go. I could not stay in that household for long because I said like, no can do. Kind of like, no offense, but if I hear any more of this tone of voice, I will not be able to chill. So I was like on edge throughout all of that, like staying over in that place, and I was like anxious and worried, and the whole thing in my head was like screaming at me, just flee as fast as possible, as far as possible. So every time I would leave that, you know, family, I get like the sense of like relief, and I was like, okay, so I don't have to hear this anymore. It's not there anymore. We're good. We're calm. We're safe. Like no more of that. But yeah, like for anyone, triggers can be something absolutely different, you know, and the response can be absolutely different. For somebody, it's like a more of like a fight response where they get also angry and defensive and they're on the edge. Some others get into this fawn response where they're trying to kind of like mitigate damage and like be assertive, be like the mama bear all of a sudden and try to kind of like even it out and like please everybody so it kind of like goes away. But sadly, it's just like how the responses are. So how to deal with triggers from trauma. Healing from trauma is challenging and takes time. It may feel like the easiest way to overcome it is to avoid it or pretend it isn't happening. However, it is best to spot your triggers to learn how to manage them instead of avoiding them. Even if you're not sure what has triggered you, there are steps you can take. When a trigger leaves you feeling emotionally flooded, you can try following these steps to soothe and regulate your nervous system. Focus on what's happening in here and now. Remind yourself that this is a common reaction to a traumatic event, and you can get through it. Perform breathing exercises to calm your mind. Manage the trigger with different ways to cope, such as using the flashback halting protocol. What is flashback halting protocol? Triggers can make it feel like you are living the traumatic event all over again. The flashback halting protocol aims to halt the flashback and bring you back to the present moment. This can help your mind and body realize that the trauma isn't actually happening anymore. Next time you find yourself faced with a flashback, try reading and answering these questions to yourself. Right now, I am feeling, insert, you know, I am sensing in my body such and such, because I am remembering the bad person, the vehicle, the war. At the same time, it is now, say, current date and time, and I'm here at, name the place, and I can see, name 5 objects around you. And so I know that the trauma is not happening now. But as it goes, sometimes when you still get into like some certain situations, it's not like you can just like go through the protocol and it's gonna like, you know, go away. It doesn't work like that sometimes. And kind of like validating that it did happen to you is sort of like allowing yourself to feel through the feelings, emotions that were there, and kind of like not judging yourself on it also is very important, because I genuinely hate it, despise it. Even when you share, or like, you know, you are triggered and you say to a person that you are triggered and right now you're just like anxious, like panicking, scared, sad, whatever, and people are invalidating your experience. I hate it the most, because that's quite immature, to put the least, but that's also like not empathetic, and not, it's kind of like people do not care about you or what you're experiencing, and they're not kind of like validating that, okay, so this is what's going on, this is what you're feeling, how about we take you out of it, you know, like get out of the experience, situation, music, sound, whatever, you know, smell. So once you leave the situation or like place where you're triggered, it gets kind of like easier. And if the person who saw you triggered, if they're more mature and you're able to explain to them what happened and where it's coming from, and they're accepting, you know, of it, and they're validating your experience, they'll be mindful in, you know, future situations, because then they can also perceive the situations, you know, or your triggers, so like before you're triggered, so that all this, like, you know, experience is not there, and or if there is no kind of like escape or like out of it, if they're mature enough, they can be there for you and hold your hand or hug you, you know, through the experience, and kind of like be there for you to help you out and not make you feel this certain horrible way. But that's that. So examples of triggers. Responses to trauma are very individualized. Chances are two people who experience a similar traumatic event won't share triggers or have the same symptoms afterward. Trauma triggers vary wildly between people, and they can be anything at all, such as feeling a certain emotion, encountering an everyday event, or seeing a highly specific pattern. Some examples of possible trauma triggers include, sounds. Hearing a specific sound can lead to an unwanted response and trigger our bodies to react and feel unsafe, even in a secure environment. Some examples of trigger sounds can be sirens, music, fireworks, footsteps, gunshots, sounds of crying, someone yelling. Last one applies way too long. Too much, as well as footsteps, kind of like... Anyway, there's also sights. Seeing a particular item, environment, person can easily be a trigger. For example, after a car accident, seeing a similar car to the one you were driving at the time of a traumatic event can lead to an unwanted response. Some other examples include people of similar ages or characteristics of others involved in the traumatic situation, an intoxicated person, very much so, a building or place, healthcare professionals such as first responders, piece of clothing. So there's also smells. Our senses connect directly to our brain and constantly send messages as we interact with the world around us. Smells are closely linked with memory. It's easy for a smell to bring up mental images and feelings you associate with that smell, like the smell of cinnamon evoking memories of Christmas. When we smell something, our brain immediately tries to identify the scent. As it works on figuring it out, it can also jog memories of when we've encountered that same scent before. Possible triggers that come from smells include a fragrance or cologne, alcoholic drinks, grilling meats, gasoline, certain foods or drinks. Situations. Sometimes we may find ourselves in certain situations that trigger a traumatic memory. Some circumstances that trigger emotions may be speaking with authority figure, encountering someone with perceived narcissism, driving in a car, experiencing rejection, experiencing a violation of your boundaries, unwanted physical touch. Public transport. Ladies, we've all been there. Emotions. Sometimes a particular emotion is associated with traumatic event. You might encounter a seemingly manageable situation as an adult in which you feel helpless, which might remind you of times when you were truly helpless as a child. This could even trigger memories of childhood experiences, causing emotional flooding and overwhelm. Other examples of emotional triggers are feeling ignored, sensing abandonment, feeling sad or crying. So, how to identify a trigger? So, a good one if you can just like journal it at some point. So what did you hear? What did you see? What did you smell? How was the feeling? And basically, daily diary can kind of help it out. And over 7 consecutive days, they reported intrusions, blah, 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 blah. So you can just genuinely like go through it yourself. So next steps. When you're reminded of a life-changing traumatic event, it can take over your life and lead to adverse effects on your psychological and physical health. If you feel ready to talk to someone about it, consider looking for trauma-focused treatment. Treatments supported, as you can see, it's all being also kind of like copied from a website, but does the trick. So having trauma specialists does help you with understanding what level of PTSD or CPTSD you might encounter. So there's prolonged exposure therapy and there's cognitive processing therapy. So some therapies, they can help through just, I mean, some people use even hypnosis and or, medication to help out. I've even heard that some people with depression and CPTSD and PTSD microdose psilocybin to treat the effects. So yeah, life. So basically, trauma triggers is one of the things that, in case you have been traumatized, been through things, could genuinely help you out to see what's up. So yeah, so that's that. Off to the next one.